Is it possible to fix plantar fasciitis in 1 week? Well, that depends on a few things. First, how long have you had plantar fasciitis? The longer it's been ongoing, the more likely the plantar fascia is really inflamed and irritated. 2, do we know what's causing the stress on the plantar fascia? And 3, how quickly can we alleviate that stress to stop getting the plantar fascia irritated? A lot of people try self-help techniques like using a frozen water bottle to roll out their foot, using a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball to roll out that same area, stretching, night splints, you name it, whatever they can find on Google and WebMD. But a lot of these self-help techniques don't work, or they have transient success at best. And the reason why is because they're not addressing the root origin of the problem. And I can explain why. My name's Ryan Tisdale. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, a board-certified sports specialist, and my wife and I own and operate Kinesis PT and Performance. Here at Kinesis, we specialize in athletic rehab and performance, and specifically, we focus on working with runners. And one of the most common injuries runners come into the clinic with is plantar fasciitis. And most of them try a lot of those self-help techniques that I mentioned previously, but they don't really have long-lasting success. Sometimes they'll get a little bit of relief, but it doesn't stay. And it's because, again, they're not addressing the root origin of the problem. I'm going to show you 2 things we see most commonly as the cause of plantar fasciitis, and a couple tips on how you can address these issues on your own and get rid of plantar fasciitis for good. One of the easiest flaws in running technique to identify as the cause of plantar fasciitis is an overstride with forefoot initial contact. So what exactly does that mean? That means somebody is reaching out too far in front of themselves and they're landing essentially on the front of their foot, so on their toes. And what is happening is the front of their foot, their plantar fascia, the gastroc, their Achilles, is absorbing all the impact or ground reaction forces when they meet the ground. So what I'm going to do is click through here, frame by frame. You're going to see Kayleen come into the picture, and notice her forefoot or her toes are the first thing to meet the ground here. So that's our initial contact, the point at which your foot initially contacts the ground. Imagine that, some crazy naming. So again, when we have this forefoot initial contact, we get into a stressful situation for the Achilles, the plantar fascia, the gastroc, and the soleus. I'm going to click a solid frame here so we can take a look at this. So this red line here, what is that showing? That is Kayleen's center of gravity as it comes down to the ground, and it's showing that her foot is landing in front of her center of gravity. Why is that important? If I ask Kayleen to stand in this position, because her center of gravity is behind the base of support, being her foot, she'd essentially be falling backwards, okay? This is not a position we can hold. The other reason why that's important is as she's moving forward, because her center of gravity is behind her point of contact, she has to absorb essentially the body weight moving forward as the ground acts back on her lower extremity kinetic chain. And the first thing to absorb that stress is her ankle and her foot. The other thing we see here is this big angle here. We have a gray line and like a little purple pie here. That's showing a degree measurement of 118 degrees. And that, technically that is the angle, but that's not the angle we'd measure plantar flexion. And really that would be the difference between 90 and 118. So 28 degrees of plantar flexion is what she's landing in. The way we correct this is not necessarily by having people heel strike. That doesn't fix the problem, it just changes what part of the body is going to get injured. But we need this foot to come back underneath of her. We need this foot to land more at that red line, and we need her to get more of a relaxed posture through her ankle foot and not feel like she has to reach out for the ground. Here's another example, same thing on the other side. So again, we have that red line coming down, marking her center of gravity, okay, where she's contacting the ground relative to her center of gravity. So anytime we land in front of that center of gravity, we're absorbing all the ground reaction forces from our body weight momentum moving forward. And specifically, if we land in this plantar flex, so like that's the gas pedal position with your ankle foot, that's the first part of the kinetic chain to absorb that stress. Now, the other flaw in running technique that is often overlooked, but is always another area we need to look at in terms of potential causes for plantar fasciitis, is what I'm going to show you right here. So we need to take a look at frontal plane motion. I'm just going to do a still shot here. So what we're looking at here is specifically our support limb when we get into mid stance, or what some of us call our running pose. What I'm looking at is her left hip here relative to her right and relative to her femur. So I have two lines here trying to draw from essentially the center of the hip joint, so your greater trochanter to greater trochanter, then splitting down the back of the thigh, marking the femur. And you notice that degree is 74.6. Okay, that would be much better if it was closer to 80. What this is showing us is that the contralateral hip, being her right hip, is dropping and her femur is moving inward, what we call adduction and internal rotation. You can't really see the internal rotation because this is only a two-dimensional video. If we had some cool sensors on there, you'd actually be able to see the internal rotation of the femur as well. Now, what does that do down the chain? Let's follow that down past the knee to the ankle foot. Take a look at her foot here, and specifically her calcaneal bone, so her heel bone. We have a line that's trying to split the heel bone and then tracing up straight the back of the tibia up through the Achilles. Okay, if we look at that number, that's 165.6. So again, that's not the true anatomical measurement. We do 180 minus that difference. Okay, so we're at about 15 degrees of calcaneal eversion. Now, why is that important? That calcaneal eversion essentially aligns joints in the foot, unlocking the midfoot, allowing it to overpronate. Okay, so let me say that again. When you over-evert, or the calcaneus gets stuck into that much eversion, it aligns joints in your foot that unlock the midfoot, allowing you to pronate and get stuck in that overpronation. So what does that do to that plantar fascia that's supposed to support your arch? It flattens out, okay? So really, we have two causes here. We can have a cadence that is too low, placing excessive stress on your glute med, min, and max. Okay, so if she starts to drop, she internally rotates through her femur. We get valgus at the knee, and we get overpronation at the foot because our calcaneus is overly everted. Okay, so we stretch the plantar fascia because her cadence is too low. Let me say that again. Cadence too low, too much time spent in single limb support, overstresses the hip, therefore she's not able to stabilize, and we get essentially pronation and internal rotation of the entire kinetic chain. Now, the other thing that can happen is this person just doesn't have good footwear on, and I can promise you her shoes here are not good. So if you don't have the right shoes on for your ankle foot, even if you do have the right cadence, this can be another cause, and sometimes room for orthotics can help kind of prevent this excessive pronation and calcaneal eversion to take the stress off the plantar fascia. We're going to click through frame by frame here so you can kind of watch her knee and that ankle rotate in there. She does it on both sides, but for sure a little bit worse on the left than the right. So again, we got a little heel strike. We move through into our mid stance and watch that foot go boom. Almost looks like she's going to fall off the inside of her shoe there. Okay. So again, either from too low of a cadence, or let's say your cadence is at 180, we just might not have the strength in our glute med, glute min, and glute max to stabilize our pelvis, or our obliques aren't doing what they're supposed to. So that can be another issue. But these are really the big running deficits we see, and a great place to start is correcting your running technique. So how do we fix this? Really, there's a couple different drills we can do, but I'm going to show you one in particular, one of my favorites. So what you're going to do is you're going to stand with your back to a wall. You're essentially going to run in place. This is what we call an alternating support or alternating pose. Essentially, what I want you to imagine you're doing is running on a hot stove or hot coals with bare feet. So as soon as your foot hits the ground, you're pulling it off the ground as quick as you can back underneath your hips. We do not want to spend a lot of time on the ground. A good thing to do is set a metronome to 180 and to try to match that metronome as you're doing this. Typically have people run in place here for 10 to 15 seconds and then fall away from the wall so that they can learn to get their center of gravity out in front of their hips. If you're used to stepping behind yourself, you will in fact step on the wall and you will not do this correctly. So again, we're running in place, practicing pulling our feet off the ground at a cadence of 180 steps per minute. Set a metronome to help you find that. We want our hips underneath of our shoulders and our feet underneath of our hips. Keep that same cadence as you run away from the wall to prevent an overstride. Now, if this information and message is resonating with you and you're ready to start running pain-free, a running analysis is a great place to start. Normally we offer this service for $120, but for those of you who watch this training video, we're offering a one-time 50% discount. You can click the link to schedule a free call to learn more, and if you decide it's right for you, schedule your running analysis. During a running analysis, we utilize motion capture technology to help us identify the origin of your issues. You'll immediately see where your running mechanics are breaking down and learn what you can start doing now to start addressing those issues. Following the session, you'll be emailed a link to your video analysis and sent a PDF containing running analysis data and objective measures. We both know magic wands don't exist in the real world. Quick fixes are simply band-aids that address the symptoms and not the root origins of your dysfunction. Correction of running technique takes time and practice. Many of our runners are with us for 3 to 6 months, depending on the severity of their injury, deficits in their running technique, and underlying movement abilities. So if you're ready to take the first step in your journey to running pain-free, click the link, schedule your free call to learn more about this running assessment, and if you decide it's right for you, get your running assessment scheduled.